together. Some things about peer support that I really don't need to say much about, but what we're talking about is being with rather than fixing, a mutual responsibility in the relationship for the outcome. We might even have a friendship, but peer support, as you know, is really different than a friendship, which is a more casual relationship. Peer support is an intentional relationship. We have goals, we have agreements, we're moving and going someplace. We know what to do if we get off track. We know when we're finished, Okay, Jeff was mentioning the value that a meaningful job creates for the person themselves, right? So these are some of the things that showed up. We did a survey this year of our peer employees that had been employed at least 2 months, because we thought at that point there would be enough show up that we could get some kind of an idea of what some of those things were. 66% of the people that we surveyed as our peer employees were unemployed when they came to us, and 35% hadn't worked for at least 3 years. Average number of hours worked was 30 a week. 20% of the people that came to us as peer employees went off disability. I don't know about you, and I don't know about here, but this doesn't happen. In the U.S., it's less than 1% of people with serious mental illness go off their disability benefits. 37% reduced their disability payments. 45% went off public health care, the Medicaid program. Discontinued housing subsidies, a large number that were getting food stamps, discontinued food stamps. The financial impact of this peer employment on an annual basis, Recovery Innovations paid out $8 million in salaries, $1.2 million paid in income taxes, $500,000 of savings in disability payments. This is good for business. This is not a hard sell, especially in the times we're in. But they also said some of these things. 87%, helping others has helped me in my own recovery. I feel more confident. I'm more emotionally stable. I'm more satisfied with life in general, 73%. More interested in future career opportunities. I'm more financially stable. Been able to connect more with family. You can go down the list. I've taken a paid vacation. 35% of our peer employees had never had a vacation, but they went to the Grand Canyon in their own car and had someone house sit who watched their dog. Peer support specialists help others in a way that we've never seen before. And this was just one example of when we first put our peer specialists on the acute care inpatient units at our county hospital. There were 9 inpatient units. We placed 2 peer support specialists there every day. So there was a good dose of peer support. They did orientation to recovery workshops. And they did their version of a discharge plan that they created, that they wrote, because they knew what was needed to help them succeed when they left the hospital when they'd been there. So they called that the discharge recovery plan. And it had things that were not on the clinical discharge plan, very practical things like, who's going to pick me up? What about my backpack behind my case manager's desk? Oh, thanks. The bills in my mailbox, my cat that I'm worried about that maybe ran away, or how am I going to get my pills from the pharmacy? And as a result of that, the hospital reported that in the first year that the peers were there was a 56% reduction in readmissions. Now, this was not a scientific study, but that's the only thing that was different, was that the peer support specialists were there. reduction in seclusion and restraint in the hospital because there was a different sense of accountability. If you've been traumatized and injured, have a much heightened sensitivity and awareness about how we speak to each other, about how close we stand, about how we gesture, the things that can be triggering. Helps the system recover. We've got to confront professional stigma. Please help us with that. I know you're doing it. That's what peers contribute to. We got to get over some of this crap. Some of these tragic beliefs that we've held about people. We've got to see people as people, and we can see them moving into roles as colleagues, working on our teams, right? And it saves money. So when we started the Living Room, the peer-run alternative to the hospital in Phoenix, we tracked for 15 months the savings in hospital costs. This is dramatic. Hospital admissions, we were the front door, and after 24 hours, we had to make a decision whether the person would move on to the inpatient unit on an involuntary compulsory status or not, and it dropped in the one setting from about 25% to 10%. This represented a savings of almost a little over $10 million in hospital costs. Now, we were also, the system and people we served, were the beneficiary of that because that got redirected back to build more peer and recovery-oriented services. How cool is that? $8 million of it went into people's paychecks because they were working and earning salary. We provide services outside of Seattle in Pierce County where they've reported better access, better care, and better outcomes. And in 2010, when we opened our Recovery Response Center in Tacoma, Washington, the funder began a massive redesign of the crisis and emergency system, and you can see what was reported. A year later, 19.5% reduction in hospital admissions, a savings of $1.5 million, 32% reduction in compulsory treatment, $2 million was saved, 32% reduction in readmission rate, reduction in the average length of stay in the hospital from 19.6 to 12.1 days, $4.4 million was saved. So now what they've done is they've come back and said, gosh, you guys, this is incredible. We now have this money that we can use to do things that we'd only dreamt about. So they came back to us and funded our peer recovery team, which are peers connecting with people on the acute care units, helping them get out as advocates and supporters, and then working to support them as a peer for up to 3 weeks is all after they leave to make sure they're connected to a whole range of things and that that's working. In the first year, we served 120 people. The year prior to this peer recovery team service, this group of 120 had 131 hospital admissions. It's not too hard to figure, a little over one per person, right? But in the 12 months of the service, since the peer recovery team, there were only 23 for this same group hospital admissions. My God, that just blows my mind. And this was magic because we weren't trying to do this. This wasn't something that we set out deliberately. This was not a random controlled trial where we're trying to prove a hypothesis, This is just what showed up. So now they're saying to me, we want everybody. This was with only people that were what we call unfunded, who were not on Medicaid and didn't have a benefit. It was a small cohort. Now they want everybody that's in an acute care hospital to have this service because they have more money to provide it. So we should talk about some of this, huh? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dean.
Hi, I'm Sheena Mooney, and I'm one of the peer educators for the Peer Employment Project in Cambridgeshire. So we were very fortunate to have Terence, a colleague of Jean's, come over and deliver training to us, of which I took part, and then was trained up in order to be able to deliver that training as to peer workers. And then prior to going fully into post, I worked for 3 months as a peer worker on one of our acute wards. And so that's me.
My name is Annalise Franklin. I'm an advanced specialist occupational therapist, and part of that role is that I line manage 3 peer worker posts. That's why I'm here.
Great. And Sharon Guilfoyle is our wonderful peer employment project manager who's actually put this presentation together but couldn't be here today, but she's here in spirit anyway. Peer workers started coming into post in our trust in the summer of 2010. They're permanent paid posts at band 3 mostly. And it was always anticipated that peer workers would go both into community teams and onto the wards and onto the acute wards. And currently this is where we have peer workers at the moment, some of whom are part-time and some of whom are full-time. We'd originally anticipated that we would send 2 peer workers into the teams as part-timers, sort of one post between them, so that they would have solidarity and support, really. And that hasn't always worked out like that, and some of them are part-time posts, and people sort of working on their own there. So yes, that just sort of shows where the different posts are. There's been a change in Peterborough, the way things have been set up with the different acute and recovery pathways recently.
Right, so the role of the inpatient peer worker, in the trust, we allowed this to develop really rather than prescribing what the role would look like on each ward, because this was something that was very new to us. But some of the specific aspects of their role, that peer workers have the time to listen to people's stories and also to share their own, particularly as nurses and therapists are drawn more into care planning and this mysterious paperwork side of their role, is that peer workers have a lot more time to spend with people. They also are involved a lot in social inclusion work, and particularly around when people are on the ward, they're on section quite a lot of the time, and using their Section 17 leave, and it changes the dynamic from having a nurse escort to having a pair to go along with them. So that's a big part of their role. Also a lot of involvement in group work. Peer workers on the ward run their own recovery groups, and they also have had a role in supporting clients to attend groups that other staff members run, and also to provide input, for example, some of the groups that I run, to provide input on to what I could do to improve it, to make it more recovery focused as well. And they're also involved in some generic tasks that other OT and nursing assistant roles are, that would be a similar sort of banding, for example, around bed making, observations, the hourly sort of checks on the ward. So they do get involved in some of those generic tasks as well. As with any new role being developed, there's been some challenges. I think one of the big things that we noticed at first was there was a lot of shock from the peer workers at the extent of the medical language that was used and the sort of negativity that was associated with that. And that goes along with a focus on risk and symptoms and what is wrong with the person rather than what is right. And at times on some of the wards, they have been included in the nursing numbers all the time, and that actually limits the amount of time available that they've got for that key bit of their role around listening and supporting and sharing their own stories. One of the other challenges was a concern from some staff that they may lose their jobs and be replaced by peer workers, which wasn't the case. And there was also a challenge around physical interventions and whether peer workers should be involved in those or not. Despite the challenges, we've had a lot more positives than challenges. And generally, peer work has been really welcomed into their teams, generally seen as a really positive addition to the existing teams, and started to see a shift in some of the attitudes and the language, and a move away from that really medical language and that real risk focus, and that's not only in the spoken language but also in the changes to documentation that made within the trust. A lot of being asked, our peer workers are feeding back that they're being asked for their opinion now by other staff or by consultants, which is really powerful. A lot of the positive impact has also been around making staff think before they speak, and I've noticed it in the teams as well, and a lot of the peer workers have fed back so that they see staff member just about to say something and they stop and rephrase it, which has been a real positive. A lot of role modelling around peers, role modelling for staff, not only around the language, but also noticing more staff starting to say, actually, I have some experience as well, which certainly nobody ever dared mention that they might have mental health problems as well. Running the groups has been a real positive as well. And also some of the peer workers have completed the physical intervention training and are involved in that, but the role and the dynamic that they take is really different, and it's more about supporting the person rather than this sort of all-in sort of restraint. So that's been a positive as well.
Okay, so just a few of the issues to highlight. Should peer workers be included in the shift numbers? There's pros and cons there. They're seen as part of the team, maybe not seen as separate, and they can model different ways of perhaps being with people who are being observed. But if it can also detract from their other work, clearly. Whether they should be line managed by occupational therapists or nurses. My first day when I went to work as a peer worker on the ward, I went to sort of try to get access to the little office and the nurse's office, and I was told, oh no, you don't belong here, you're down there with the occupational therapist. So not really wanting to engage with me or something, really. So there's pros and cons, I think, both ways. So whether peers should be present at these meetings, I think, well, from my point of view, it's up to the person themselves who they would want to have present at those meetings, really, and whether that's the peer worker or whoever, who they've got a relationship with. It would be good to